Will they carve this into my tombstone? George Underwood still carries this worry in 2024. The punch he threw over a girl named Carol Goldsmith in that 1962 fight created an anisocoria and permanently dilated David's left pupil. That day, George didn't just damage David's eye, he gave him his mysterious look. After 4 months of hospital treatment following that fight at Bromley Technical School, David would later tell George, "You did me a favor." The two childhood friends would go on to make music together in the King Bees, and George would design the covers for Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust. But why did David see this physical trauma as an artistic gift? Because that otherworldly gaze was exactly what a young man searching for his identity needed. Thanks for listening to this story. If you want to learn more hidden secrets from music history, please don't forget to subscribe. Because the psychological truths behind David Bowie's physical difference and his pioneering role in the gender revolution will surprise you. It all started in 1956 at the Bromley Scouts. 9-year-old David Jones and George Underwood were enrolling at the same time, and both were crazy about music. George describes those days. "David and I would walk up and down Bromley High Street all dressed up, thinking we were God's gift, trying to impress the girls." The duo had just discovered rock and roll and memorized every song from Elvis Presley to Little Richard. Even then, David was different. He styled his hair in special ways and secretly tried his mother Peggy's makeup. George was more laid back, but he was the only one who could keep up with David's imagination. In the late 1950s, the two friends started experimenting with music together. In the small studio they set up in George's basement, David sang while George played guitar. David's voice was already distinctive, slightly raspy and emotional. But what really struck you was his stage charisma. Even at 13, when David stepped on stage, he became a completely different person. His confidence was through the roof. His gestures and expressions seemed much more mature than his age. George watched this transformation with amazement. When David got on stage, he became someone else, like some secret character inside him was coming out. The two friends' first serious music group was George and the Dragons, but it didn't last long. David's ego clashed with group dynamics. He wanted to be the leader while the others wanted to be equal partners. This didn't bother George because he acknowledged that David's stage charisma was superior to his own. But David's competitive attitude with girlfriends was starting to create tension among those close to him. In early 1962, both fell for Carol Goldsmith. Carol was a beautiful and intelligent girl, admired by the youth in Bromley. Both David and George were trying to catch her attention, but with different tactics. David was more talkative and showy, while George was more sincere and genuine. Carol's 15th birthday party became the climax of this rivalry. George had planned the party as an opportunity to talk with Carol, but David was there too, and was the center of attention as always. During the party, David had quite a bit to drink. Even though they were only 15, alcohol was easy to come by back then. George chose to stay sober and found a chance for a private conversation with Carol at the end of the party. The girl made him a surprising offer: "Let's meet Wednesday evening at the youth club." George accepted with genuine joy and didn't share this secret with anyone. But David's competitive nature made him uneasy because he sensed his friend had made special arrangements with Carol. A few hours before the meeting, David called George. His voice was quite gloomy, and what he said shocked George. "Carol doesn't want to meet with you. She asked me to tell you she'd rather go out with me instead." George didn't want to believe it at first, but David's insistent manner convinced him. Despite his disappointment, he still decided to go to the youth club. When he got there, he learned the truth. Carol had waited for him for a whole hour, and her friends were wondering why George hadn't shown up. The next morning, while riding the bus to school, George overheard David talking to his friends. David was bragging about going out with a girl last night. George's blood boiled because David hadn't just lied. He'd manipulated him to prevent the meeting with Carol, then bragged about it. During break time, George couldn't take it anymore and confronted David. "What kind of friend are you?" George asked angrily. David initially thought he was joking and grinned, which made George even angrier. George had never been a fighter before, but David's treacherous behavior was what drove him crazy. Instead of the honesty he expected from a friend, he saw manipulation and lies. "I wasn't really a fighter, but at that moment I walked toward him and threw the punch," George recalls that moment. The punch hit David's left eye, and George's fingernail scratched the pupil. David collapsed to the ground and started moaning, holding his eye. At first it seemed like an ordinary fight, but David's painful screams showed the seriousness of the situation. The school principal immediately intervened and took David to Farnborough Hospital. David was sent home that evening, but George spent the night tormented by guilt. He didn't want to hurt his friend, he just wanted to give him a black eye. 2 days later, ironically on Valentine's Day, David's father, Terry Jones, rushed his son to Moorfields Eye Hospital in a panic. David woke up feeling like his eye had exploded. His pupil was abnormally dilated and wasn't responding to light at all. The initial examination at the hospital revealed the seriousness of the situation. George's fingernail had scratched the corneal surface, creating permanent damage to the iris muscles. When anisocoria was diagnosed, David's family was shocked. Dr. Richardson told the family plainly, "The left pupil will no longer respond to light and will remain permanently dilated. Depth perception has been seriously affected, and full vision capacity won't return." David's mother, Peggy, started crying, while his father angrily called George's family to demand answers. David lay in his hospital bed feeling guilty. He had made his friend so angry that it had come to this. During the 4-month treatment process, David's mood changed dramatically. Looking in the mirror, he could see that his eyes were different, and he felt strange. The pupil in his left eye was permanently dilated, while his right eye responded normally. This asymmetry gave him an otherworldly appearance, but at the time, David perceived it as a flaw. It was the feelings of loneliness and difference that depressed him. After leaving the hospital, the silence between David and George lasted for months. George felt terrible, while David was angry at his friend but also missed him. What broke the ice between them was music. Although David's depth perception was damaged, his musical ability was completely unharmed. In fact, it had developed in some ways because physical limitations made him more sensitive to sound and rhythm. In 1964, they formed the King Bees. George played bass guitar while David was on vocals. During their first rehearsal, when the two friends looked at each other, they decided to leave the past behind. David told George, "I'm someone different now, but that's not a bad thing." George replied, "I didn't intend to make you this way, but maybe this was destiny's plan." This conversation became a turning point in both friends' lives. The King Bees' only album, Liza Jane, achieved moderate success, but the group didn't last long. David's musical vision was too big and clashed with group dynamics. George realized that the music industry wasn't for him and that the artistic field was more suitable. David supported his friend's decision. "You express your creativity better through visual arts, and I do it through music. We're both on the right path." In the mid-1960s, David began to see his physical difference as part of his identity search. During that period, mod culture became widespread in London, and difference became fashionable. David's asymmetric eyes set him apart from other mod youth. When people looked at him, they would ask in surprise, "Why are your eyes different colors?" David was initially bothered by this question, but over time he realized it was a unique characteristic. Anisocoria played a critical role in shaping David's stage persona. Under stage lights, the dilated pupil in his left eye became more prominent, giving him an otherworldly appearance. During one of his early performances, a fan shouted, "Are you a real person, or did you come from another planet?" David liked this comment and began consciously developing his alien image. His physical difference gave him confidence on stage because he had already accepted that he wasn't normal. During this period, David's gender identity questioning also began. He felt he didn't conform to traditional masculinity norms and related this to his physical appearance. Anisocoria had distanced him from normal masculinity patterns and directed him toward a more androgynous identity. His friends told him, "You're different, David, but that's what makes you special." This support accelerated David's self-acceptance process. In 1967, David asked George for visual support for his first solo album. George had been designing covers for horror and fantasy books until then, but David's project offered him a different creative realm. George's illustration for the back cover of the David Bowie album perfectly reflected his friend's musical vision. The drawing highlighted David's different eyes, using this physical feature as a symbol of power. George describes that period. "I always felt guilty about David's eyes, but he constantly told me this became my trademark. When I designed the album cover, I emphasized this feature because he was no longer ashamed of it. Quite the opposite, he was proud." This collaboration was where the two friends' creative fields intersected. David's musical vision was completed by George's visual interpretation. Their collaboration for the Hunky-Dory album 1971 became even deeper. George's design highlighted David's androgynous appearance, creating an image that transcended gender boundaries. When David saw this design, he said, "This is what I was looking for. You've reflected my inner world externally." David's gaze on the album cover carried both masculine and feminine character, thanks to anisocoria. In 1972, David placed his anisocoria at the center of the Ziggy Stardust character. The alien eyes of the bisexual rock star from space were inspired by David's physical difference. George's design for the Ziggy Stardust album cover perfectly captured this concept. David's anisocoria was no longer a flaw, but the foundation of rock history's most iconic appearance. Through the Ziggy Stardust character, David fully embraced his physical difference. In stage performances, he used makeup that emphasized the asymmetric structure of his eyes and highlighted this feature with lighting effects. Fans created legends about Ziggy's eyes, and David's anisocoria became part of rock mythology. Now his physical difference was his power, not his weakness. George watched this transformation with amazement. 10 years after that 1962 fight, David's eyes were bringing him worldwide fame. "While I thought I had harmed him, I had actually given him the greatest gift." This realization reduced George's feelings of guilt, while increasing his belief in the mystery of destiny. David's anisocoria played an important role in the gender revolution of the 1970s. His otherworldly appearance had distanced him from traditional gender roles, allowing him to build a freer identity. When he made his bisexual confession, 1972, fans connected this revelation to his anisocoria. It was as if his physical difference had also freed him from gender norms. David explained that period. "Having different eyes set me apart from other men. Thanks to this physical feature, I could also comfortably show my feminine side. Society already didn't see me as normal, so I didn't feel the need to conform to normalcy." This explanation showed the deep impact of anisocoria on David's gender identity. During the glam rock period, David's eyes practically became his trademark. Makeup artist Pierre Laroche developed special techniques to emphasize David's anisocoria. Dark colors were applied around the left eye, light tones around the right eye. This makeup technique highlighted the asymmetry and gave David a completely unique appearance. During the 1977 Heroes album period, David had developed a more mature approach to his anisocoria. He no longer felt the need to hide or emphasize it. He simply accepted it as part of himself. The photographs George took during that period reflected David's inner peace. The difference in his eyes was still there, but he no longer focused on it, displaying his natural state. David said these words to George, "When I look in the mirror now, I don't think of you. I see myself and I'm satisfied. If that fight hadn't happened, maybe I never would have been so brave. My physical difference gave me the courage to accept myself." This expression cleared the last shadow between the two friends. During his Berlin period, David's music became more introspective, and anisocoria was now perceived as a reflection of his inner world rather than his external appearance. Fans interpreted the difference in his eyes as an indicator of David's depth, connecting this physical feature to his artistic complexity. In the early 2000s, David began speaking openly about anisocoria in interviews. He no longer saw it as something to hide, but presented it as an interesting anecdote from rock history. His friendship with George also reached its peak during this period because both had come to understand that the fight had actually brought creative gifts to both of them. In David's final years, anisocoria became more pronounced as eye muscles weakened with age, but this condition didn't bother him at all. Even on the Black Star album cover, the difference in his eyes was emphasized, as if he wanted to highlight this feature one last time for his life's final project. After David's death in 2016, George said, "Every time I look in the mirror, I think of him now. That fight changed my life too, because the fear of hurting him made me a much more careful and empathetic person. David's success gives me pride too, because I'm also part of his story." Today, David Bowie's story is used as an example in campaigns to raise awareness about anisocoria. At Moorfields Eye Hospital, David's case is still used as educational material, teaching young doctors how physical differences can affect patients' mental health. David's story shows that medical anomalies aren't necessarily disadvantages. With the right approach, they can be turned into advantages. In the art world, David's anisocoria has inspired countless academic studies on creativity and difference. Particularly in gender studies, the role of physical differences in identity construction is examined through David's case. Classes titled The Bowie Phenomenon are taught at Cambridge and Oxford universities. George Underwood is now 77 years old and still actively creating art. His Angel series, started after David's death, consists of works dedicated to his friend's memory. The anisocoria motif is frequently used in these pieces, exploring the theme of physical difference, transforming into spiritual beauty. Carol Goldsmith, in a rare interview years later, said, "I feel guilty for causing that fight, but seeing David's success, I think maybe it was destiny's plan. If that fight hadn't happened, the world would never have seen Ziggy Stardust." David Bowie's anisocoria isn't just a medical condition, it's also a symbol of the power of creativity, the resilience of friendship, and the beauty of difference. George Underwood's punch unintentionally changed the course of rock history and bound two friends' lives together forever. Today, patients with anisocoria take David Bowie as an example, embracing their physical differences and seeing this condition not as a disadvantage but as a special feature that sets them apart from others. The medical world also uses this case to emphasize the importance of empathy and positive approach in patient-doctor communication. David Bowie's story shows us that sometimes we receive life's greatest gifts in the most unexpected ways. A childhood fight, a physical injury, and two friends forgiving each other ultimately launched an artistic revolution that affected the entire world. George's punch didn't just change David's eye, it changed the future of rock music. And best of all, the two friends' friendship emerged even stronger from this drama.